Sankirtan ki jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambita Bhujo Kanagavadatu Sankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Kalo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavokaro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gaurudai Pushpavanto Chitro Sando Tamando Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhaya Charano Sakho Sukho Paramanando Sundaro Sivadriyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Bhakta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishwabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Shri Radhe Gopal Ki Jai Shri Uddharana Datta Thakura Tirobhava Ki Jai Oh Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Oh Premanande. We're gathered on the auspicious day commemorating the disappearance of Uddharana Datta Thakura. I want to begin by citing a verse from Caitanya Charitamrita, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami glorifies the Thakur. He says, Mahabhagavata Shrestha Datta Uddharana Sarva Bhave Seve Nityanandera Charana. There's a reason I cite this verse to begin with. It's a beautiful glorification of Uddharana Datta Thakura, but it's one that has elements in it that I've seen in other verses that have been misunderstood. And by addressing those points here, I think it'll be clear to all of you how that can come about and how such misunderstandings can be avoided. So Krishna says, Mahabhagavata Shrestha. He is the best Shrestha of the Mahabhagatas. This is nice. There's more than one best. I once, this is separate from the main point I want to raise. A godbrother of mine, a disciple of Prabhupada, was very critical of the pranam mantra that had been composed in honor of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. Described me as the best of the disciples of Saraswati Thakur. And so I forwarded him, Govinda Maharaj, the successor of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, his verses that constituted pranam, a set of pranam mantras glorifying Prabhupada, because Prabhupada had one time asked Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj if he could compile some verses for his disciples to chant in regard to himself. Not uncharacteristic of Prabhupada, he didn't wait for that and went on and put a couple together himself. He characterized him in his own mind in a humble way, or I should say maybe with regard only to his external Vaishnava campaign, Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatadesha Tarane, for example. Gauravani Pacharane is what he's most known for. But anyway, after the passing of Prabhupada Govinda Maharaj reminded Pujabhat Sridhar Maharaj of that request and asked if he could compose some verses. And at that time, a number of Prabhupada's disciples were under the shelter of Pujabhat Sridhar Maharaj at the Math regularly and so forth. And he asked if he could compose some prayers and that Sridhar Maharaj would edit them and so forth. So he did, and they're beautiful prayers, and we've incorporated them into our liturgy here in Chaitanya Sangha. But in the prayers, of course, Govinda Maharaj glorified Prabhupada as the best Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples. So I forwarded to that fellow, trying to broaden his perspective. There's more than one best. But here today, Uddharana Datta Thakura is certainly the best. Mahabhagavata Shrestha Datta Uddharana. So this is the name that was given to him by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Previously it was called Divakara. Kara means maker, and here means the day maker. So he was named after the sun, which makes the day maker. In the biographical works composed at the Shripad of Uddharana Datta Thakura, there is some nice poetry in which the author seeks to connect the name of his birth, the sun, the maker of the day, with the name given to him by Nityananda Uddharana, because the day maker, the sun, sends its rays everywhere, brings light, illumines the world, and similarly, without citing the poetry. Uddharana Datta, Uddharana means, speaks of the generosity of, in this case, the giving of bhakti everywhere, like the sun. He was like the sun in terms of the extent to which he successfully participated in wide dissemination of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which was the task given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Nityananda Prabhu. Each of Nityananda Prabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates, let's say in the Panchatattva, for example, 5 figures there, we could say they're all the best, and we speak about it from different angles of vision. So as far as wide dissemination of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, this is how we champion the seva of Nityananda Prabhu, one of the ways, and the most probably prominent way. If we speak about Gadadhar, he'll be the best from another angle of vision, or Advaita, who brought him here. So Gadadhar, who made it possible for him to enter into the bhava of Radha by getting out of the way, allowing that to happen, and so forth. He being the Radha of Gaur-Lila himself, Sri Gadadhar. So again, there's more than one best. But here, his name, Uddharana Datta. Uddharana, he gradually became known as Uddharana Datta Thakura. Thakura is a very elevated, what would you call it, honorific, that at the time was very, very seldom given, to anyone. Thakura means God. Often the deity is referred to as Thakura. Of course, in relation to a devotee, it means like God, representative of God, and so forth. One time in Mayapur, during the monthly festival, it was organized by Prabhupada, that he kindly personally asked me to attend every year. Spent 1 month with him in Mayapur and Vrindavan. During a lecture, he had occasion to mention the title Thakur and say it was for exalted devotees. And so I forget the context. But after the lecture, then as he came upstairs into his quarters, one of his disciples said, Prabhupada, we would like to address you as Thakur. And Prabhupada said, why? And he was completely separated from what he had just said 10 minutes ago in his own mind. He didn't understand what they were. Why would you want to do that? It was very real. So where he was thinking about him, how he thought about himself, that didn't make any sense. And then the disciple said, well, you just said this is for all the devotees. And Prabhupada said, well, not now. Like maybe some other time, maybe later. So, but at the time, and this was But at that time, there were a few Thakuras around. It was more commonly Bhakti Thakur, Bhakti Saraswati Thakur, in our own lineage, the two preceding Prabhupada. But at the time of Uddharana Datta Thakura, it's mentioned in that biographical text that this was would be very rare for such a thing, but the common people referred to him in this way. And so it stuck, Uddharana Datta Thakura. And here is the point I wanted to raise. Sarva Bhave Seve Nityanandera Charan. It says that he served the feet, Nityanandera, of Nityananda, his charan, his feet. Sarva Bhave. So Sarva Bhave here means with all of his heart, with all of his feeling, Sarva Bhave, with all of his emotions, with all of his everything about in every possible way. But I have seen a verse in Chaitanya Bhagavat where Nityananda Prabhu is described as serving Nityananda Prabhu, as serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Sarva Bhava. And I've seen it interpreted. This means that Nityananda served Chaitanya in all bhavas, in all rasas. Therefore, Nityananda is also a gopi, also has gopi bhav. So I want to just briefly explain how to reach that kind of conclusion is not very well scripturally and spiritually, theologically reasoned. First of all, what are all the bhavas? Well, there's quite a few. If you want to talk about the primary bhavas, sthayi bhavas, the self-defining bhavas, dasya, shanta, dasya, sakya, vatsalya, madhurya. Well, within them, there are two kinds of shantaras. There are like 4 or 5 kinds of dasiras. There's 4 kinds of sakyaras. Salyaras, there may be at least one. And several kinds of 2 primary divisions within Madhurya Rasa. So if you want to interpret the verse in that way, then you have to say Nityananda Prabhu served as, let's look at the different types of dasiras. Well, one type is the sons of Krishna in Dwarka served him like a father. And that's one type of dasya. So it just doesn't, if you know anything about the Leela, of course, and you do, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's would be inappropriate to interpret it that way. When we see practically Goswamis, we see Nityananda Prabhu through the lens of the Goswamis, it's very clear. He's Balaram. He's coming in the mood of Balaram and assisting Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his personal pursuit of Radha in ways that he cannot do directly as Balaram in Krishna Leela. So it's a special opportunity for him. But he himself is in Sakyarasa, and of course the Dvadas Gopals, of whom Uddharana Datta is one. Dvadas Gopals it's a term that is found in one of the Puranas. It's the earliest reference to it that I could find, and then it was developed within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, wherein, as I said before, the devotees realized at some point that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Krishna himself and that his associates must be here, so they started to look for them. And so the idea gradually came about that these 12 principal cowherd friends of Krishna and Balaram must be here as well, and they were uncovered by different devotees. Of course, this uncovering, if you will, by different devotees also is such that not everybody agrees entirely, but not everybody's scriptural and spiritual reasoning about it is necessarily wrong, even when 2 differ. But some arguments may be better reasoned than others. This is an interesting point in itself. The most famous book, perhaps, that describes the who's who, if you will, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates in Vrindavan is the Gaura Ganadesh Deepika. Some of you may be familiar with this book of Kavi Karnapur. The beginning of the book, it's worth mentioning this, I think. In the beginning of the book, he says that based on what I've heard from others in scriptural reference and with the application of my own intellect, I lay out here this for your consideration. Who are the associates of Krishna in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? So he starts with the obvious ones, Balaram is Nityananda, so on and so forth. And in there, he gives different opinions. Some say this, some say that. The one that probably has the most possibilities is Ramananda Roy. He says in 2 verses, Ramananda Roy is the combined bhava of Arjun, Pandava Arjun, and Arjun Sakha, the Priyanarma Sakha, he says, of Braj. So he's saying these a part of the bhav of one and the other have come together to form a third person in Gaur Leela. By that analysis, Ramananda Roy would not necessarily be a third person in the Braj Leela, but a third person for the specific Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Why that particular, one good reason like that. This is the first opinion he gives. Why is he giving this opinion? Because Mahaprabhu said that that Ramananda Roy is Arjun. He said Bhavananda Roy is Maharaj Pandu, and the 5 sons Maharaj Pandu are the Pandavas, and amongst them Ramananda Roy is Arjuna. So this is a pretty strong statement from Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya, so that has to be honored. So he's Pandava Arjuna. However, Ramananda Roy, if we study Chaitanya Charitamrita, we'll see that he was very instrumental in the Anti-Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in helping Chaitanya Mahaprabhu step into Radha Bhav along with Swarup Damodar. That means he had to be pretty acquainted with Radha Bhav. Also his discourse with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when they first met is very elevated, and it takes us beyond the rasic reach of Pandavarjun. Pandavarjun is a friend of Krishna. He's a Puri Sambandhi, a friend in the metropolitan area, not in the village. Because Sakiras is a little different. Doesn't have quite the same force as we mentioned the other day. If Krishna should show Aishvarya to Arjun, like he did in the Gita, showing himself to be God, it caused the Sakirasa of Pandavarjuna to retract a little bit. That doesn't happen in Vrindavan. When Krishna lifts Govardhan Hill and shows himself to be God, his coward friends like Arjun Sakha, the Priyanarma Sakha, help him hold the hill up. They think he needs help. So, therefore, whoever it was that Kavi Karnapur was referring to, their opinion, they've obviously looked for how can we account, he's Pandava Arjuna according to Mahaprabhu, but how can we account for the Braj Bhav found in Ramananda Roy at the same time? So they made a scripturally reasonable conjecture that there's an Arjuna also in Golok, in Braj. He's a Priyanarma Sakha. His name is Arjuna. These Priyanarma Sakhas are very well acquainted with Madhurya Rasa. So we look at him like this. That's where he got it from. Combination of both. That's their conjecture, some persons. Then he goes on to say, others say he is Lalita Saki. Wait, makes him a gopi. Now he's a gopi, and because some persons read the text that he's a gopi, he's this, he's that, he's all of these things at once, and so forth. But that's not how to read the text. He's showing different opinions, and if you think deeply about it, because where those opinions are coming from. So some saying is Lalita Saki. Well, why would they think that? Because again, he is so instrumental in the end of helping Chaitanya Mahaprabhu step into the bhava of Radha that Lalita Saki is so acquainted with. But he says, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says he's Pandava Arjuna. The way he says that in his verse, the meaning is that, but I don't agree with that, because Mahaprabhu has said this, and that would be a contradiction. We have to, however, he's thinking, whatever we come up with, it has to be centered around this idea that he's Arjuna. Pandava Arjuna, because Mahaprabhu said that. We'll have to add to that, nuance that, and so forth. But to say that he's the Lalita Saki. So he's actually dismissing that idea. Then he goes on to say, and others, high devotees, they say that he is Pandava Arjuna and the Gopi Arjuniya. The idea here is that, I think I mentioned this before, that there's a story in the Puranas where Arjuna asks Krishna about this Braj Bhav that's so captivating to him. So Krishna sends him to Braj and arranges for him, under the direction of a gopika, to bathe in a lake and come out in the body of a gopi, Arjuniya, for a day, and then today goes in the lake and comes back out as Arjuna. He's got some experience of what that's like. So Kavi Karnapur is trying to say, well, some say this, and this is how they're doing the same thing. They're getting some, but the Gopi Bhav of Arjuniya, well, that's not as compelling, given it's just an occasional acquaintance, and the story has another point to it, not that Arjuna is also a gopi. That's not the point of the story, and that's not what the story is saying. It's glorifying the measure of Gopi Bhav. So Priyanarmasaka Arjuna would be more suited, in my opinion, humble opinion, to minister to Mahaprabhu with regard to Radha Bhav than Arjuna's fleeting experience with Gopi Bhav. But then Kavi Parnapur says, anyway, three of these are acceptable. That would mean the fourth one, Lalita Saki, again, is discounted. So there are different opinions. So there's some flexibility with this. So these are not things to beat one another over the head with, as we sometimes see, unfortunately, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is very unpleasant, unpalatable. And all of these are associates of Krishna. They're the dearest things to Krishna. Their love is what Krishna's self corresponds with, the object of the love. So just a side point there for your consideration, and what you might run into here and there. We know that Uddharana Datta Thakura was blessed by Nityananda Prabhu. Nityananda Prabhu came to his village, Saptagram, performing some kirtan, sitting under a tree. It's this very special place, confluence of three rivers, the Ganga, the Jamuna, the Saraswati, Triveni, among other things, and its auspiciousness is considerable. It's the place thought to be where the sons of Priyarata, the seven rishis, resided and attained their perfection and so forth. Anyway, Nityananda Prabhu came there performing Sankirtan, and he was approximately maybe 7-8 years older than Uddharana Datta. At this time, Uddharana Datta was a married man. Samprasanna was his wife's name. They had a son named Priyankar, and he was in his early 20s. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Nityananda Prabhu, as I say, about 7 years old, or maybe 32, something like that. So he came, chanted by the kirtan of Nityananda Prabhu, and bowed at his feet, wept on his lotus feet, and Nityananda Prabhu placed his hand on his head and blessed him, told him, "You are Subhahu Gopa from Krishna Lila, again coming to serve me." Gave him the name Uddharana Datta Thakura Lila. And then together with him, they made a big campaign in that area of West Bengal. It's said that Uddharana Datta Thakura and the community of Saptagram, they were largely gold merchants, and due to some political intrigue, they had been disenfranchised from the social religious system of the Varnashram and were considered outcasts, like Haridas Thakur was considered an outcast for his birth from the Hindu caste system. So they were in a difficult situation, materially speaking, socially speaking. And Nityananda Prabhu and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were very sympathetic to them. He said Nityananda Prabhu appeared in the world to deliver the people of Saptagram. So apparently it's a long history. They were nominally Vaishnavas, but now they were socially disenfranchised as well. And so even aside from their being outcasts, just the fact that they were merchants would make it unacceptable by the system for Brahmins to accept food cooked by them. But Uddharana Datta was famous for cooking for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. So shortly after his initiation, he cooked for Nityananda Prabhu. There was some discussion in the house. Uddharana Datta Thakura, Nityananda Prabhu discussing with one Brahmin, Bhakti versus Gyan. And at some point, Nityananda Prabhu said, "Well, let's take prasada, resolve the issue." And so they sat down, and then it became apparent to him, the Brahmin, that Uddharana Datta had cooked. He said, "I can't cook for him. He's a merchant at best." And Nityananda Prabhu said, "Well, he's cooked for Govinda. He's made an offering here. He's a Vaishnava." And he gave him the Vaishnava perspective on this. So finally, the Brahmin was convinced, and then he sat down to eat. And then Uddharana Datta was going to serve the prasad. He said, "It's bad enough I have to eat what he cooked. Now he has to serve. I have to take from his hand." So he refused now the second time. So Mahaprabhu said, "Can you give me that? Give me the spoon that you cooked with, that wooden spoon." He took that wooden spoon outside and stuck it in the ground. And a malati, lata, vine tree grew on the spot. Beautiful white flowers tinged with golden hue, very fragrant and so forth. Of course, the Brahmin passed out at such, and paid his obeisances to Nityananda Prabhu and Uddharana Datta Thakura and said, "I'm very hungry. Could you please give me a little bit more of that, whatever you've cooked?" Right? So Uddharana Datta was privy to the miraculous powers, if you will, of Nityananda Prabhu, firsthand experience of that. When he actually, aside from his lineage, if you will, family lineage, caste designation that he had been, the others of Saptagram had been disenfranchised from, his lineage is of interest in that within his family line, if you will, he was related through marriage to, what was his name? A famous poet who served in the court of Lakshman Sen along with Jaidev Goswami, who's very famous for his Gita Govinda. So, just to say something about his family as well, that was looked down upon at the time. He wouldn't agree with that. But that being the case, and the Savarna community had been like disenfranchised from Hindu social system. It wasn't something totally uncommon. As I said, Haridas Thakur was in a similar situation, and Rupa and Sanatana Goswami were as well. They had served in the administration of Nawab Hussain Shah, and the Hindus considered them contaminated. They were the leaders, if you will, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. So it's not. So he has come, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Patita Pavan, along with Nityananda Prabhu, to deliver the fallen people. Fallen by other estimation, but not by his. So when Nityananda Prabhu left for the first time from campaign that he started with Uddharana Datta in Saptagram, he went to Shantipur and other places. The wife of Uddharana Datta passed away at an early age. Nityananda Prabhu initiated his son before leaving, named him Srinivas, changed his name. And there, anyway, the Datta, Uddharana Datta was a very wealthy person, inherited lots of money, and they were gold merchants. He was very, very wealthy. So he gave up everything. For all intents and purposes, he shaved his head. The picture is here. White cloth, outer cloth, coping, and decorated his head with tilak and his body with the names of Krishna and so forth, wearing the tulsi mala around his neck, japa mala always in his hand. He very much exemplified in this way the perfect sadhaka. At the same time, of course, there are descriptions in Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavata also of Uddharana Datta and other members of the Dwadasa Gopal group, again, of which there are different opinions, who's who and who's a member of that and who's not. Other descriptions of them wherein it appears that their Sakya Bhav, their fraternal love, they wore, sometimes it's said in English, on their sleeve. It was like coming out, and showed up in their sadhaka deha, their practitioner's body. So that under that influence, they conducted themselves in ways that sadhakas would not, or in ways that would not be an example for sadhakas, particularly to behave. But the extent to which they did so at that time was such that we could distinguish them in doing that from those who might imitate that. In other words, they did things like ride on the backs of Bengali tigers and get them to chant Hare Krishna in their madness, dancing and playing flutes and whatnot, like we heard some of the descriptions of Krishna's cowherd friends doing in Braj. Their bhav overcame them. So these descriptions are there, but there are other descriptions of them as well. And this is one of Uddharana Datta Thakura, wherein he set the example of a very composed, meditative sadhaka. In fact, his sadhaka's life and the example he set in that life, aside from these occasions that his bhav just overtook him, has been compared to that of Raghunath Das Goswami. It's said that he renounced life altogether after the disappearance of Nityananda Prabhu at 48 years old. At that time, he went to Vrindavan. He retired in Vrindavan. He spent some years in Puri, and then he went to Vrindavan. But during that period, Vasu Ghosh, a famous associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, poet, wrote many, many songs and poems glorifying Gaur, Nityananda Prabhu, and some of the associates, of course, of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he's written about Uddharana Datta Thakura, describes him in this way: shaven head, tilak, that he ate only milk, slept a half an hour a day. The descriptions are you immediately upon reading them, you draw the comparison to Raghunath Das Goswami. Then it said he was a very learned scholar, which we know Das Goswami was. He found some time to write. But he's compared to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, on the other hand, who was also very learned and he was so busy with service, he didn't have any time to write a book. So some people say, well, Uddharana Datta Thakura was so learned, but he didn't write any books. And so this is the answer. He didn't have any time for writing. Somehow Raghunath Das eked out some time from a similar lifestyle. But anyway, these descriptions are endear us to him because like the Goswamis, he and some of the other Dwadasa Gopals set an example of sadhana that we could follow. This is not the case with all of the associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They were moved by their bhav to act as they did, and in ways that don't necessarily or typically represent the behavior, the dress, the decorum, I should say, of a sadhaka. So we find that in Uddharana Datta. It said that when Nityananda Prabhu began to visit with other devotees from Bengal, visit Caitanya Mahaprabhu and Jagannath Puri on an annual basis, that Uddharana Datta accompanied him. And on the occasion of, it must have been about 1516, in the Common Era, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked Nityananda Prabhu, don't return here again next year, because I want you to spend your time in Saptagram, so these 7 villages. Even the names of those villages are there today. Vasudevpur, Shivapur, Nityanandapur, so for the group of villages in the Saptagram area. I want you to spend time delivering them there. And there was this, at that time, Mahaprabhu communicated to him that in order to do so, you should marry. You'll be able to get closer to the people in that way, who all typically are householders. And a sannyasi has certain decorum that he must follow, which Mahaprabhu adopted in order to widely distribute that which he came to bring, but at the same time, which by the decorum of sannyas, limited to some extent his ability to do so. It facilitated it in one sense, but in another sense, it limited, because there are certain places, if he went to deliver the people where his heart had gone for them, people would criticize, what's a sannyasi doing there in that place? So it was through Nityananda Prabhu, his other self, people, that he was able, his heart was able to be represented by a personality equal to himself, capable of delivering them. Therefore, there's a famous saying, if you see Nityananda Prabhu in a brothel, you should not think that he's there for any other reason than delivering the people, by giving them something else to drink, that Bhakti Rasa, something like that. So he went literally to the downtrodden people. So Mahaprabhu at that time acknowledged Uddharana Datta Thakura to be his principal assistant and asked him to accompany him. But at that time, nonetheless, he allowed them to stay a little longer than the rest of the group, because he was telling them not to return. So they spent 6 months there, and every day Uddharana Datta Thakura cooked for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So as I say, he was famous for his cooking, and his cooking was heartily accepted by Nitai Chand and Sri Chaitanya Devi. So they returned to Saptagram, and there's a big campaign there for preaching. Now, in the preaching of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu, there is a division. There's a divide. And this divide is kind of strategical in a sense. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as a sannyasi from a Brahmin family and very strictly adhering to the decorum of a sannyasi, he could go and have a discourse, for example, with the learned and elevated, highly respected Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. with South India with Venkatabhatta, who was like the head priest of the Srirangam temple in the Ramanuja Sampradaya, back heading north to Banaras, then with Prakashananda Saraswati, big Advaitin sannyasi that had thousands of disciples. So in order to enter into a theological discourse with them, he's preaching to the Brahminical class, the educated priestly class who knew Sanskrit. That was their language, if you will, preferred. So that's one group, and then there's the rest of the people. So Mahaprabhu's campaign was designed largely to convert intelligent, educated people. Of course, he converted them in a very sublime way, and that is primarily by his example, which, and we say in English, speaks louder than precept. So, for example, he did convert Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. How? By listening to him and not saying anything. After the Bhattacharya just gave what, I think 9 different interpretations of the Atmarama verse from the Bhagavatam, educating as he thought he was doing the young Caitanya, 24-year-old lad, in the logic of Vedanta, that he might be fortified in his vows of sannyas. Difficult to do at that age when the whole world is after you. And your senses are very, very active and so forth. So he thought, I better fortify him with the logic of Vedanta. So he gave discourse to him, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sat silently for 7 days and listened. That's how he converted him, by being silent. The silence was deafening to Bhattacharya. He said, what is he thinking? What is he thinking? I've said that. That was really far out. That was a really good insight I've given here. Well, he's not saying anything. So then he pressed it. He said, I've said, what do you think? He said, I think that it's very poetic, but it's a little imaginary, what you've come up with. So he did say something that took him by, but he had created by his silence, the point is a teachable moment. Now Sarvabhauma was like, who is he? What is he thinking? So once that was created, then Mahaprabhu caused him to ask, and then he replied and gave his own explanation. What is it? 64 different explanations of the same verse, all reaching the conclusion of bhakti over jnana, which is the opposite of what Sarvabhauma had how he had interpreted the verse. And of course, this was the conversion then of the great Bhattacharya Sarvabhauma. In South India, to go through the examples, Venkatabhatta, how did he convert Venkatabhatta? By joking with him. He joked with him. He's a great devotee of Narayan, Lakshmi Narayan. He said, you're such a great devotee of Lakshmi Narayan. Yes, I humbly, I want to serve them. He said, a question has come to my mind, and that is that in the scriptures, it's said that Lakshmi wanted to have, to enter the rasa dance with Krishna, but she's supposed to be said to be very chaste, to the most chaste lady, to her husband, Narayan. So can you explain this to me? He said, surely you are joking. Come on. And he gave some tattva. That the tattva is that Narayan and Krishna, they're same. It's not a different person, just different moods of the same person. So there's no problem here. Mahaprabhu said, oh, very good. I have one other question. Yes, what is that? Why she was unsuccessful? And he passed out. Who could even ask the question? What is it that he knows? Why Lakshmi? Then Mahaprabhu had created this teaching moment through his joking, and then he explained to him, only by Raga Bhakti, by following this, she performed austerities in Braj. Krishna met her there and said, Lakshmi, what are you doing here? You're a queen. What are you doing here in the dusty cow village? She said, oh, I'm performing austerities. I've got my royal dress off. I'm wearing a simple white cloth and just eating what falls from the trees. Why are you doing this? Because I'm performing austerity. I want to enter the rasa dance. He said, well, you can't get there like that. She said, how can I enter? He said, well, it's very easy. That's very difficult what you're doing. You shouldn't do that. It's very simple. You give up your husband, and you accept someone else as your husband. Then you cheat on him by coming to me in the middle of it. She forgot it. I can't do that. So this, of course, he's explaining Parakiya Bhav to her, and this, of course, there's a lesson to the story. If you want to enter into that, there's a way to do that. You have to take birth in Braj as a gopi. You have to have your marriage arranged, and then you have to hear the flute call of Krishna, and join him in the moonlight, right? So this way he converted also Venkata, and in the north, this Prakasananda, he converted him also by his humility. He came in to speak to the group of sannyasis, and he sat himself at the door where everyone left their shoes, waiting to wash the feet of the sannyasis as they came in. And Prakasananda said, oh, no, you're also sannyasi. Of course, the day before he had criticized, what is this? What kind of sannyasa is this guy? He's out there singing and dancing. This is not for sannyasis. Sannyasis are supposed to study the scripture and be very grave and control their emotions. He's out there dancing like a babubaka. Well, he was, as the Bhagavatam says, what? You should be You should become this kind of emotional, trans-psychological emotions. This is what the Bhagavatam is about. Of course, that's what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Kirtan was about, what it was arising out of. But this Jnani and Advaita and Prakashananda, he didn't have any understanding of rasa. So seeing the humility of Mahaprabhu, he said, you come and I might have criticized you the other day, but you're in a lower order of sannyas. That's true, but than us. But still, you shouldn't sit there and say something. And created a teaching moment, and he converted Sarvabhauma with the charger. So he taught largely by his example. So, but this is the division. He was preaching to these leading, educated people, and Nityananda Prabhu was charged with preaching to the downtrodden. And the division between the two also is one of ministering to and the Brahminical community in consideration of their temperament and disposition and so forth. And Nityananda Prabhu ministering to the lower class people, if you will. His work took on an element of social Vaishnava, I want to call it Vaishnava social activism. In other words, he was more involved with the people and their social concerns. After all, the whole community of Satyakram had been socially ostracized, right? As I mentioned earlier. And so he created a new social system for them one ritual, replacing all the Varnashram rituals, Nam Sankirtan. They could all come together and chant and so on and so forth. And he was a little closer to the common people, and therefore closer to their plight, which included problems that a sannyasi like Prakasananda wouldn't be having, or Sarvabhauma wouldn't be having, or Venkata and so on and so forth. The plight of women, for example, and caste issues and so forth that they were suffering from. Nityananda Prabhu was concerned with this. So there's an element in his preaching of social activism in the context at the same time of giving them bhakti rasa. I think there's a famous book, I wrote the name down, let me see if I find it here. Just to give you a reference. Godapata Tarangini, Godapala Tarangini. It's like a book about like Vaishnava anthology, about the Vaishnava Associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and so forth. And in there, it speaks of the outreach of Nityananda Prabhu and the wave of compassion and social activism, that was part of his outreach. I'll read something I've written about this. The outreach of Nitai and his associates represented in Caitanya Bhagavat depicts the early Sankirtan of Nityananda as a revolt against complex Brahminical ritual and its religious monopoly. Their outreach was also a means of communicating and disseminating a new social religious standard and providing the community with a unifying congregational form of spiritual practice, Nam Sankirtan. The philosopher Virgindranath Steele refers to Sri Nityananda Prabhu as Bengali's first true Democrat. In his outreach, Nitai disregarded both caste and gender distinctions, and the well-known Vaishnava anthology, Gopa Paratarangani, speaks of a verse, I don't know where it's from, attributed to Lochan Das Thakur, where it said, Nityananda Prabhu in particular improved the plight of women in the community. So again, his campaign transcended caste and gender distinctions that were so prominent within Varnashram, elevated them beyond that, and his social activism, if you will, in the context, again, of giving Hari Bhakti, is very much alive and clear to us in the example of Uddharana Datta Thakura. Again, the Thakur was a wealthy disciple of Nityananda Prabhu, but he didn't keep anything for himself. It said he arranged for 10 acres of land in which he established a large storehouse for rice and dal and so forth. And it was called Anachata. So it's a place for distributing food. At that time, there was a drought in Bengal, very serious drought. So people were suffering. So he arranged a 10-acre cooking facility to feed the masses on a daily basis. This is where whatever resources he found, monetary resources he poured into this. And he bought some other property. Badravan was called at the time, forest. And he turned the forest into housing. It was like a housing development. He built houses for free for people, that they could come live there and be freed from also the material circumstances, which were troublesome. He catered to these things that were a little closer, if you will, to the people in general. So a good example of his social activism combined, if you will, with his distribution of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dispensation. That area of Saptagram was very, it was a live area because it was a port. As I said, there were 3 rivers converging there. And in the 16th and 17th century, the French and the Portuguese merchants came there. Now, you might think, why Nityananda didn't get on a boat? He waited for Prabhupada to come and went inside of him and rowed the boat all the way across the ocean. Right? That's part of the story, obviously. But in the memoirs of some of the Portuguese and French merchants, both of them, it's mentioned that, among other things, describing as they did in their memoirs the area, it was very common to find in a house idols being worshipped with musical accompaniment and temples. So this is the work of Uddharana Datta Thakura, Nityananda Prabhu, Ki Jai. In every house, a temple, Sankirtan in every house. Very wide campaign. Unfortunately, there was a problem there with silting, it's called. It made the river, that area, its capacity to serve as a port diminished it considerably. And so the community spread out, and now it's quite a rural area compared to what it was. But Prabhupada notes in his own writing that at the time of the British, who made their capital in India in Calcutta, half of the population of Calcutta consisted of the Sil and the Mullik families, all from Saptagram, all these gold merchants and so forth. Prabhupada's own family, the Day family, is a subdivision of the Mullik family. So he is from that whole Saptagram community. Prabhupada was born in a Sakiras family. And Uddharana Datta Thakura was the patron saint of their family. So they would go annually to the preaching center, which is really the residence, and Uddharana Datta Pur became named after him, where there's a deity of Uddharana Datta, and I think the deity's been moved now. Did we put the picture of him on the? Yeah, this picture. I think that's a photograph of that picture there. There he has the deity. He worships the deity of Sadbhuj, and it's mentioned in his biography. Sadbhuj is a six-armed form of Caitanya Mahaprabhu, the implication of which is that as Mahaprabhu showing that form to Sarvabhauma wanted to make the point, I am Ram, I am Krishna, I am Swayam Bhagavan. How we say it another way, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam. This point comes again. So this is the form also that one of the forms of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that Uddharana Datta worship, that deity is there. And in the biography, it's mentioned that this was his thinking behind it. I want to teach the people that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Swayam Bhagavan himself. So Ram is his avatar, he is Krishna, and so forth. We also had deity of Gaura-Nityananda and Gadadhar, and maybe Radha Govinda as well. So, as I say, it's significant for us that Prabhupada was born in this family. He idealized the Sakirasa of Uddharana Datta Thakura, and Nityananda Prabhu himself wrote about it. What did he say? He sings his prayer. Tomaracharani bhai, abhashe shukha bhai, Gocharani Guritin Bo, Korto Bani Chuti Bani Kai, Lutuputi Shedin, Kobe Hobemo, Shedin, Kobe Hobemo. Private poem on board the Jaladuta. Prabhupada wrote this stanza: when will I enter into the pasturing, cowherding leelas of Krishna, roaming from forest to forest throughout the day, throughout the entire day, leaping like a frog and jumping and rolling and over and over again. When, he says, when will this day be mine? So expresses in his private, wasn't written for the public. We were able to find it and publish it and get some hint from it about his own cherished ideal. When I came in touch with Sridhar Maharaj, I was surprised to find that he had memorized the prayer, that poem, and he had thought deeply about the implications of it. And he was happy to speak to us about it, and in his own estimation, how it constituted conclusive evidence as to cherished idea, the longing of Prabhupada to attain Bhakti Rasa of that form. Subahu Gopa is also a Priya Narmasaka. All the Narmasakas, as they're described in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, are either Narmasakas or Priya Sakas. Subahu being Priya Narmasaka, whose Sakya Bhavas is a touch of Madhurya, like yogurt is the Sakya Rasa. A little bit of honey in there, Madhurya Rasa, giving them the capacity to minister to Krishna's romantic heart and romantic plight, if you will, that he encounters on a daily basis. So we're fortunate to be able to say a few things about Uddharana Datta Thakura, and on this occasion, we're also going to impart initiation, blessing to chant Harinam, and give my prediction to some of the students who have come, who seem to like these ideas. So this procedure, we follow something that Bhaktivinoda Thakur about initiation is drawn from Adili Baldi Vijabhusana. How to give initiation is described in Hari Bhakti Vilas in very elaborate ways. Way 1, way 2, A2, less elaborate, way 3, well, nothing else. Just impart the mantra. That's what it's really about. So we will do that, but we're going to add a few ritual elements to that. 5, that means the pundra, tapa, mantra, yagya, nam. So we give a nam, a name. It was, in times gone by, it was more typical to give the name of Krishna, a name of Ananta Das, Govinda Das, Gadadhar Das. As time goes on, it's been also accustomed to give the name of a devotee of Krishna, who's very heart of Krishna, or things related to Krishna, and so forth. So that's also now common and good. And of course, names of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates, and names of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In other words, the disciples, the associates of Mahaprabhu didn't have names like Chaitanya Das, well, maybe a couple of them. But for the most part, they have names of Krishna. And so it has been extended in that way. So Nam, we give Nam, and then there is Pundra. Urdhva Pundra means a tilak, this kind of vertical tilak. There are different within Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sadhaya, and they each have a tilak. For us, of course, we're coming in the line of Bhaktivedanta, Pujapachita Maharaj, Bhakti-Rakshashita Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who had as his guru, as we've heard, Nam Guru Bhaktivinoda, his mantra guru, or Kishore. They were from different lineages, the Nityananda lineage, the Advaita lineage. So it gets a little confusing. So when they were asked what lineage you're from, what paribar, Bhaktivinoda taught, Bhaktisiddhanta taught his disciples to say, we're from the Bhaktivinoda paribar. Let's stop it there. He's a big person in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's very practical. Pujapachita Maharaj gave an example sometimes of how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur himself drew his disciplic line by mentioning in the line, or including in the line, luminaries, great devotees who made great contributions. He said, just like if we describe the contributions in modern science, there'll be thousands of scientists, but not everybody's a Newton. They're all bona fide scientists. Not everybody's a Copernicus or whatever. So we can't name them all. It was a custom, even up to the time of Bhaktivinoda, that initiation would be given, and the names of the gurus in the line up to the formation of the line by Nityananda or Gadadhar or Advaita, one of Mahaprabhu's associates. This is called the Siddha Pranali. Pranali means line, and these are the Siddhas in the line. So they would list them. This is over 500 years. And it was thought, the disciples led to believe that all of them were siddhas in the line. So now in these lines, others would be mentioned that you may never heard of. Everyone's heard of Narottam Thakur, everyone's heard of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and so forth. So Bhaktisiddhanta drew his line a little differently by just naming the main Mahabhagavatas who brought this whole line down in the biggest way. Not to dismiss everybody else, but you can't name them all. And with his own line, well, he had two, right? And so we thought, let's name the big luminary in the line Bhaktivinoda. We'll call it the Bhaktivinoda Paribar, like the Shamananda Paribar I mentioned, or like the Narottam Paribar. And this is how he reasoned about it. And of course, it was a convention to name the gurus in the line like this, and what is their internal ideal as well. But if this is to go on for another 1,000 years, let's say 10,000 years, well, each disciple is going to get a pretty long list printout of all these names. To take him all day to just mention the names of all the gurus before he can get to his Nam japa of Krishna Nam. So I just want to point out the relativity of this, if you will. The spirit of it is, of course, you're being initiated into a line. It has a teaching that accurately represents Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu's dispensation, and so on and so forth. And our connection with it is with a guru who has substantial standing in that, and we're convinced of that. And so, Bhakti Vinod Paribar. And in Bhakti Vinod Paribar, we're talking about the word Vapundra. What is the tilak? Well, it's kind of a generic Gaudiya Vaishnava tilak. Somewhere with a big leaf here, a small leaf here, somewhere the Radha Kunda or the Gopi Chandan and so forth. So if someone asks you which tilak, because Datta Thakura has a particular tilak in his lineage, again, Nityananda Prabhu has a particular Advaita with the big banyan leaf like the Tulsi here, different. So they may ask you, and you say, what do you say? Bhakti Vinod Paribar. Well, say it with some force, and then people, makes sense, must be. She feels it. Good. Not shy about that. So Urdhva Pundra, Nam, we give a Nam, right, name. We give Tapa. Tapa means it means austerity. Austerity means knowledge. The implication of it being that if you restrain your senses and mind from connection with sense objects, which is a restraint, you'll have to turn inward and go from karma and the world to that which the world moves around itself, right? So Gopal Tapani doesn't suggest that you submerge yourself up to the neck in cold water in the Ganges in January, or sit by a fire in June, July in the Rajasthani desert to realize the difference, that there's no difference between hot and cold, right? Gopal Tapani is the name of the Upanishad that reveals the Diksha mantra the main Diksha mantra of Gaudiya Sampradaya. It's an 18-syllable mantra, besides Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, made up of the names of Krishna in the dative case. That mantra is revealed in Gopal Tapani. It's a very charming story there. Brahma's relating how it was revealed to him. So it means light. Light means knowledge. But if you take it literally, then tapa means some like austerity. Therefore, in some of the Vaidhi Marg Sampradayas, whose aim is to attain Vaikuntha, we find that they would brand the disciple with the symbols of Vishnu. Time of initiation, that's some tapa. So we don't do that. But you can see on the picture of Datta Thakura what's he's got the names of Krishna stamped with Gopi Chandan or clay from the Ganga, as may be the case, or Radhakund, the names of Krishna all over his body. This is the tapa. So we'll brand him with that. These devotees, they make these brands, you see, but they're very user friendly. So you don't need a fire for that, but it will help to create a fire in you, right? Because if you wear the brand or the tilak, you wear the neck beads that you'll be given, and people may ask you, what's that all about? These are beautiful beads. And you think, where do I begin? But you'll also be reminded, yes, who am I? Yes, help us in that way, right? So you probably wear your tilak and your tapa and your Kuntimala and so forth. Of course, we live in a world where there may be circumstances that prohibit that to some extent in the working environment and so forth. But at home, when you sit and do your bhajan and so forth, these things are meant to help us. Put on a uniform, okay, I know how to act. So that is the idea. So Pundra, Tapa, Nam, and Yagya. So the Yagya, those who receive the Diksha mantra will be able to do the Archan Yagya, because the mantra corresponds with the deity and so forth. And the main Yagya, of course, in our Sampradaya is Sankirtan, as described in the Bhagavatam. Krishna Varnam Pisa Krishnam Sangam Pangastra Parshla Yadnai Sankirtan Yadantihi Sumedasa. Those who are very intelligent, like all of you, you will perform Sankirtan. So whether you get Diksha mantra or Maha mantra. So Pundra, Tapa, Mantra, Nam, and Yagya. We said them all, right? Fine, I'm getting a little older, so I need help with remembering such details. They're details, but details have a place, and they're important if they're not misinterpreted to be principles. So, come. Let's do that. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. Now, which are yours?
This one.
This one yours. Okay. So different beads. These are yours. I chanted on these beads. There's 108 beads, as you know. You start with the large bead and chant Hare Krishna with the finger and the thumb, middle finger. Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram Hare Ram. I see you have this on here after 8 different ways to think about it. Sometimes they think 108 gopis and 8 principal gopis. Krishna also has a mala, 108 jewels, and he uses them to call his cows, of which there are 8 principal groups. Another way to think about it. So that's one thing. Now I give you that. We have some neck beads. Yes. Okay. Mala, Tulsi. I get some help here.
Yes, of course.
Okay, now I'm going to give you the Gopal mantra. Maybe later tomorrow we got mantras. We give in our school. There's the Brahma Gayatri. Brahma Gayatri is the Srimad Bhagavatam is said to be a commentary on Brahma Gayatri. It's very much about properly understood what Gaudiya Vaishnavism is about, as much as Bhagavatam is, right? Guru mantra, Guru Gayatri, Core mantra, Core Gayatri, Krishna mantra, which is the Gopal mantra, and Kama Gayatri. Other lineages may do a little differently. These things are details. This is how that has been passed to myself, so I pass to you in the same way. Okay, so let me give you a Gopal mantra first. It can be right here.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right here. So the name now. You chant on the beads. You've been chanting, right? So there's a particular number of rounds you chant every day. Yes, you keep that up, right? If you do that every day, it'll be good. Keep that number. You can always increase. So I'm going to give your name Sadhvi, 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 Dasi, Sadhvi. Sadhvi, means, that's a name for Radha, the most chaste lady of all, means chaste. So there's a nice story of her chastity. It said that one day Krishna became sick. Mother Yasoda was very concerned. Nothing seemed to be able to cure him. So Krishna arranged his own sickness, then expanded himself in a disguised form as a doctor and came on the scene and took his pulse and said, oh, yes, he's very ill. And what will be the cure? Mother Yasoda asked. And he said, you have to bring water in a porous pot. Get a pot with holes in the bottom and bring that water. So she said, okay, but how's the water going to stay in the pot? And the doctor said, well, that's very easy. You have to have a chaste lady carry the pot. So in the community, Jatila's daughter, what is her name? Kutila, was very proudly thought to be the most chaste lady. And Radharani was most suspect, right? So Krishna said, you must be the most chaste lady, and gave the porous pot, or the doctor did, to Kutila, and then went to the bank of the Jamuna thinking, how's this going to work? She came back and the water poured out, empty pot. Oh, how embarrassing for her. Then the doctor's looking around. We had to find enough. There, maybe that one over there. He picks out the lady who's most suspected by everyone. That's Radhika. Gives her the pot. She takes it to the Jamuna. She comes back and somehow, miraculously, Krishna, invisibly to everyone else, but apparent to Radha, appeared with his hands in the holes of the pot, and the chaste lady was found, and Krishna was cured. So we all servants of Radha, whether in Gopi Bhav or Gopa Bhav. Way to Krishna's heart is through Radha. So your name is Sadbi. That's a very nice name. Krishna. Did I forget anything? No. Okay. Thank you. Next. Who's next? Okay, you're giving some introductions. Thank you very much. Sadbi Dasi K. Okay. It didn't hurt, did it? Didn't hurt, did it? No. Good. Well, it was a pleasure to give it to you. My pleasure. Okay, so these are yours, right? Right here. So you chant, you have a number of rounds you're chanting every day, right? Yeah, so keep that up. Commitment to that. Just put these neck beads on too. A little tight. Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. Very beautiful. Very nice sari. All those cows. Very nice. Okay, so So your name is Madhavi. Madhavi Devi. Like the tree in Uddharana Datta Thakura's courtyard. Madhavi is, Krishna's name is Madhava. Madhavi is also a name for his consort. Okay? Yes. Very good. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Again, I gave this before already, right?
No.
No? Okay.
Not that.
Okay. Very good. Right here. I probably should be taking this off. We're doing it to the whole world here. Omkardas Pija. So that's the main mantra. Then there's more, as I said, Guru mantra. Guru, I'll give it to you. Together you can come. Maybe tomorrow morning or something. Okay, come next. And I'll give you this. Keep. So you know how to chant, right? Neck beats. Do we have neck beats?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I need some help. Pull her hair back a little bit there. So when we enter into initiation, we're entering into to cultivate the mood of Sharanagati, which means to give ourselves entirely to Krishna. Faith, Shraddha, in the efficacy of Bhakti, which we acquired through associating with others, a habit is a little contagious. And so that faith is driving us, and it's expressed outwardly as what we call Sharanagati. There are 6 limbs of Sharanagati, but the first is to accept what's favorable for Bhakti and reject what's unfavorable. So obviously there are bad habits in the world that aren't conducive to Bhakti, so we forego those. My Guru Maharaj used to cite what was cited in the Bhagavatam as those things that encourage the negative influences, as it's thought of Kali Yuga, like hoarding money, like I want to say animal slaughter brings to mind that the extent to which Uddharana Datta personified the two things that Bhaktivinoda Thakur said is the essence of Dharma. Jibe doi, Krishna nam, sarvadharma sar. The essence of Dharma is be kind to others, which means also to the creatures and so forth. So we're vegetarian. And the other thing, Krishna nam, to chant Krishna nam. Be kind to others and Krishna nam. So he would say, no meat eating, no eat, fish, eggs, and so forth. And he said that he wanted that the natural drive in humans for sexuality that makes the world go round, that it should be regulated. That's something that nobody disagrees with, just where you draw the line. For example, if you're out shopping and somebody just decides, I want that lady and jumps on her, he'll be arrested. Why? Because somebody's drawn the line somewhere, right? So I'm sure even in the pornographic industry, somebody draws the line. I saw a headline the other day, porn star sues other porn star for rape. You know, it was kind of hard to relate to, but it happens, right? So everybody draws a line somewhere. So given our worldview, then we draw it somewhere as well, because our worldview involves controlling the senses and the mind. And this urge is particularly a strong sensual urge that makes the world go round. So it should be, we should find a good partner and restrict our expression, our sexuality to an expression of intimacy at most within that type of relationship. Not so hard to do, and good. So that, no meat eating, no drinking, intoxication, that doesn't help. And what's the other one? And you should be gainfully employed. Just get enough money to practice Krishna consciousness. And so he used to emphasize these things, and for good reason. I just mentioned them to you as well, to all of us. And then to chant a certain number of rounds. So you should have a number that you can chant every day and get strength from making that commitment. I bring up that in relation to Sharanagati because the first aspect of Sharanagati being accept what's favorable, reject what's unfavorable. The mood behind this is a commitment. So make a commitment to chant a certain number of rounds every day. We don't count while we're chanting, like how many have I done? When we get to the end, well, we come to this beat, we know I'm at the end, then I count after that. Then I chant. I don't count while I'm chanting. After I chant, then I count one. We don't chant. What time is it? How many have I chanted? And this is a meditation. Okay. So come, can you turn your ear? So your name is Gayatri. Gayatri goes good with Omkar. So Omkar is the original sound, and immediately after comes Gayatri. And as I said earlier, the Bhagavatam is a commentary on the meaning of Gayatri. So try to study Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay? Hari Bol. Jai. Gayatri Dasi. Jai. So that concludes our program for today, right? And then we'll take Mahaprasad, Uddharana Datta Thakura ki jai, Tirobhava Mahotsava ki jai, C.C. Daji Gopal ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanande jai.
Guru Maharaj ki jai.